My name's Alan Lee. I'm a research software engineer, computer scientist at ASU's Center for Behavior, Institutions, and the Environment. Um, I have a child who loves to design presentations and thought I needed a slide that, as she put it, didn't look so bad. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about how we manage complexity in software in the context of developing sound computational models that could help us better understand complex social and environmental dynamics. So there's been a lot of discussion over the years about how to reduce the complexity of software in computer science and software engineering industry as we build and assemble larger and larger pieces of software. This ranges from quantitative metrics that can detect the complexity of a piece of code, or various flavors of software development methodologies, programming paradigms like functional programming, object-oriented programming, domain-driven design, even specific software frameworks or languages that all promise to tame the complexity beast. A full discussion of these is pretty much out of scope for today, but I think it's safe to say that although some of it has helped, there's not really a clear-cut design or programming paradigm language that just completely solves the issue. Software development remains messy and complex and human, maybe not for long with some of the claims and hype coming out of the current batch of ML models. But instead, I'd like to talk today about the broader principles of how we manage complexity as humans from a cognitive perspective, and maybe consider some concrete practices we can adopt to help write reliable and robust software. I also invite you all to share your ideas as well, either during this presentation or at the end. Feel free to raise your hand at any point and ask any questions. So what are some of the ways we manage complexity in general? Well, we'll oftentimes try to visualize it or find different ways to describe the thing that we're interested in modeling in an effort to find patterns or to convey the information in a more concise or rich way. Here we have visualizations of the network topology of the internet as a clustered graph, or a subway map of Paris. Imagine if these had been rendered as tables of stations and distances, or data points in a CSV. We could also, of course, do the tried and true model of ignoring the complexity, writing our code as directly as possible to solve the immediate problem, and hiding from the results when they don't go our way. But typically, we use our reductionist tendencies to break things down into smaller, more comprehensible pieces, problem decomposition. We tend to have memory constraints, so we're always leaving notes and important context for ourselves, for the future, for our future selves. So breaking these software problems down into smaller, comprehensible pieces, composing them together, using abstraction to hide complex details, and striving for simplicity, these are all sort of classic techniques that we use in computer science and software engineering. This paper from Parnas from the 70s, it's quite old, but its fundamental premise still remains sound. The criteria by which we should decompose problems into software modules generally starts with listing out the difficult decisions or the areas that are likely to change. Then we hide those decisions, those areas of complexity, from the other modules. So we essentially build these mental models that reduce systems to what we would consider to be their essential components. And we build systems and tools to help us manage that complexity. So this picture is a reproduction of a map of IT systems for an actual organization and the connections between them. Each block in this diagram represents a connection between two or more such systems. It's just an edge. And some of these individual systems will have involved hundreds of person years of development over decades of time. So even building the connections between them also has a significant effort and expense involved. Once we've decomposed our systems into many parts, then we can compose those parts into a coherent whole, which is pretty easy, right? What's important about these diagrams or mental models of the software that we construct is the interfaces, the way that each piece or component or module of our software takes input and delivers output, how they exchange data. So this is where we might actually get to work. What tools do we have available to us that could help us do this better? So there's two key concepts or principles that I'd like for us to think about or take away from this talk, and that's locality and observability. Locality meaning that we try to keep the data and complexity that a software component is dealing with as local as possible, tamped down so as not to expose it to possibly infect other things. I'm probably biased because of my work at this research center that examines the trade-offs between local institutions and centralized ones. But over the years, I've seen local first to be a resilient pattern across many different contexts for social and ecological resilience, for the sustainability and resilience of institutions across diverse settings and across deep uncertainty and unforeseeable change, and of course in technology and software architectures. So I'm talking about locality here as an idea that each component of a system should strive to only know about a small part of the whole system. It should know about its stuff and its stuff only. Of course, it should be aware of key parts of the greater world, but for the most part, it tries to govern itself accordingly. This allows us to break complex systems into simpler and more manageable parts. Each part's designed to handle a specific task. And then it becomes a little bit easier to understand and modify, hopefully leading to more maintainable and resilient systems. Recent examples from this in industry is the praised the sort of transition from monoliths to microservices. Of course, that came with its own set of pitfalls, but those are slowly being managed, and it seems to be something that's probably going to be here to stay. Microservices, that is. Observability is a common phrase in the industry these days as well, and generally means that we can see into the internal execution of our software and inspect and debug what's going on and see that missing context. Oftentimes, this means logging services or monitoring tools that can provide snapshots and insight into the state of a piece of running software. In the context of the types of models that we build to understand complex social and ecological systems, I'm kind of stapling it to transparency as well. I'd like for this to include the documentation, the metadata and tests that let us inspect and validate and have trust in each component of our system. So encapsulation is, this tends to be the hardest slide for me because encapsulation is this very abstract concept so as to be nearly meaningless if you don't have direct experience with it. It's really hard to share compelling examples of encapsulation in a very concise way, but it's essentially information hiding, not exposing needless complexity from one area to another. Of course, there's a lot of trade-offs in design, but that's maybe part of the joy and challenge of writing software. Just as a visual example of the extremes in designing interfaces, so we have this flight cockpit that can be dauntingly complex. Each and every one of these controls is there for a reason, but would you rather have a big red button that executes the fly routine? Would that work all the time and be able to handle all the different possible situations that might arise in flight? I think I would prefer the latter, but of course that puts a lot of cognitive load on the operator. Another area that's of active research and work in OMF is this reusable building blocks initiative. We hope to compile some clear examples of well-encapsulated and reusable model components. This initiative is being Volker Grimm, who presented at the last ModelShare workshop, is a key member of this initiative as well. We have a paper coming out soon in environmental modeling and software. It's in press right now, but that would cover RVBs in more detail. And finally, the other area that I alluded to earlier, thinking about how to manage complexity in our software it's really talking about our metadata, the documentation and tools that we use, the notes and context that we leave for ourselves within our code. They're critical to help our future selves as well as others understand the complexity that was and is being held at bay by our code. So the rest of this talk assumes familiarity with Git and GitHub and some pieces, and we're going to kind of cover some pieces of GitHub that are freely available and can help us manage complexity as well. So Git's this excellent and occasionally infuriating piece of software with a staggeringly elegant design that allows us to collaborate with each other and manage and curate our code in very powerful and useful ways. Commits and change sets carry metadata, what was changed by whom, and the most important part, why. The why part is captured in what's called a commit log, that we have to write. We humans have to write and be disciplined about writing. Here's a commit log for a hydrological model from NOAA that we'll explore in more detail soon. Each one of these entries in this list corresponds to a granular set of changes to the code. Again, what changed, who changed it, and hopefully why. Again, this is some more logs for another piece of NOAA software that computes flood inundation maps. We can kind of follow along and see and traverse the history of what's happening inside the software. This is part of that observability. Each of the commits in this commit stream links to a pull request. That's that number that you see. A pull request is if you clicked on one of those, you would see this additional sort of detailed screen. A pull request is a collection of Git commits, all dedicated to some coherent purpose, and that carries its own specific contextual metadata. This provides both locality, the changes that were made are all specific to this area, the metadata, again, who made the change and why. It's all tied to the actual code changes. And you can see the feedback that others give on the pull request. It's an incredibly useful tool. So just to recap, Git and GitHub with disciplined use can help us maintain local knowledge of the changes that were made and observability into what changes were made, who made them, and why. But it's also important to have standards and consistency and how that metadata is recorded and curated. It's only as good as we make them. Imagine in the previous slide, what if the changes were not small and local? What if a pull request had 600 commits in it that touched 1,000 files? You would lose that ability to kind of reason about the changes that were being made easily. If all the commit log messages were simply updated file, you would lose that context of what was done, where, and why. So far, though, it seems like a lot of the onus is still on us, the developer, the research software engineers, to do the right thing, the domain scientists, to do the right thing to manage this metadata and tame the complexity of the software that we're building and assembling. In the future, it might be some kind of AI that generates most of this metadata based on the code we've written, if we write our code well enough, with good semantic names and comments, with literate programming. I don't know what that future would look like, but it would certainly lessen some of the load. There is some automation we can use right now, though, to help us ignore the easy bits and some of the hard bits so that we can focus on the hardest pieces. For example, testing and continuous integration can help us address locality by ensuring that the subcomponents that we define are robust and work properly. This in turn helps us have confidence that we can properly compose them into larger ensembles of software. So we'll go ahead and dig into some of these off-the-shelf tools to help us perform continuous integration and run our tests. And I'll just kind of actually go into Top Model here. Some things to notice about this Git repository is it's pretty well structured. It has a README that's concise. It explains the purpose of the model. It has links to how you can install and execute it. And overall, it's pretty well structured. So one thing you might notice is on each commit, there's these green check marks. These green check marks are run through what are called, this is continuous integration. So GitHub offers GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions are things that can run given a trigger. So anytime a commit happens, if we go into this commit stream, you can see that a sequence of checks are executed on that commit. There's what are called NGen integration tests, top model BMI unit tests, and then they're occurring for both Ubuntu and the latest version of Mac OS. So if we look into the details of one of these checks, it's essentially building the code. It's performing all of the setup and teardown that needs to happen in order to execute this piece of software, and then it's running the actual code against a test suite and assessing its results. So this is an incredibly powerful tool. What this means is that anytime we make a change to our code, the specification, the assertions the contract that we've laid on top of that code can be done automatically. In the old days, we'd have to build a continuous integration server like Jenkins or Clover. There's a number of these, but GitHub has this all baked in. GitLab also offers the same. So maybe next time you can have someone cover how GitLab does this. The way that you specify these is inside your GitHub Actions, you create this YAML file that declaratively says what triggers a GitHub action, and then what action should actually run. So in this case, we have on every push to these branches in Git, we will be executing this specific action. There's additional metadata that you can specify about what OSs you want to test on, and then the rest of it is just the actual steps of the workflow that you want to run. So we go through, we check out the code base after each commit, and then we invoke the rest of these in stepwise order. Any questions so far? Great. So in any case, GitHub Actions is this incredibly powerful way to provide this idea of continuous integration, something that happens automatically, that's checking your code, that's evaluating and assessing what you defined, the contracts that you've defined on top of your code. For the RBB initiative, for instance, I think one thing that we're definitely interested in is creating a suite of continuous integration tests that are constantly operating on these components to ensure that they don't break any sort of downstream contracts for code that depends on this reusable component. So to recap, for continuous integration is a mechanism for ensuring that our code always builds, that the tests that are defined that establish a contract over that code are being run, and that these are run on every change and also periodically, because occasionally, for instance, some dependencies might go missing, or if your code depends on a software library that changes, perhaps it no longer works. So this is something that if you include it in your developer experience, it's going to only help. Tests should in general be easy to read and understand. Hopefully they should run quickly so that you don't have to wait a day for them to report back and give you insight into how your code is doing. They should be focused on enforcing contracts in your code, and thinking about how the semantics of the code are operating. In general, the final takeaways I hope we can come away from this presentation is that we should apply disciplined version control to our code. This is something that a lot of the time research software is developed by domain scientists and people who are, software engineering is not their primary concern. This is changing, of course, as you can see that the those NOAA repositories are pretty well structured. They could, of course, there's always room for improvement. You're always perfect the way you are, and you could use a little improvement, right? But in general, problem decomposition, thinking about how we can structure our code, this is an art that only gets better with practice, but you have to practice in order to improve at it. Plan for refactoring. Refactoring is taking time to go back and revisit your code, revisit the design of your code, and improve it so that it can manage its complexity a little bit better. So that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in. Thanks for being a part of it.